Alright YouTube, so we're back, of course, to talk about some Final Fantasy VII Remake, and in this case we are specifically talking about Rebirth, and potentially the third game, just kind of depending on when some of this stuff takes place. But we're talking about changes. This is something we've discussed quite a bit over the last, God, it's been like over 3 years, it's kind of crazy. We talk about changes a lot, about what they may or may not do with like characters and the story, but I thought it'd be kind of a good idea to do a video where we talk about changes that we wouldn't mind. When it came to the first game in the remake trilogy, Final Fantasy VII Remake, it was relatively faithful, like pretty goddamn faithful to the Midgar segment from OG FF7. Now, obviously, they made it into a full game, 30 plus hours, added all kinds of additional content, and Chapter 18 is wild, to say the least, but overall, it was relatively faithful, right? We kind of hit every bit of the beats that we hit in the original FF7 within Midgar. And speaking of Chapter 18, given the ending of Remake is why we talk about there being changes going forward. Now, we're told by the devs that it's going to be the Final Fantasy VII story, right? Like, we're just doing the same shit, essentially, is what they're kind of talking about. And that's what a lot of the community believes, but I find that hard to believe myself just because of the ending. Like, the whole point of the ending of Remake was breaking away from Destiny, right? Changing our fates and shit. So it'd be weird if we did the ending of Remake and then, like, going forward, we're just still doing FF7 shit. Like, this doesn't make any sense, right? Like, it's just strange to me. So I think it's why a lot of the community talks about there being changes. And a lot of this is going to tie to character fates. We'll try to switch it up a little bit here and there if we can, where we're not just talking about whether characters live or die. But let's get into it. So let's get the obvious ones out of the way first. Aerith living. This is probably the most talked about change when it comes to the Remake trilogy, is whether or not she'll live this time around. A different fate to what she had in the original FF7, where she dies at the end of Disc 1 at the Forgotten Capital. This is something that I think can happen either differently or her just not dying this time around, potentially. For starters, the whole story of her running off after the events of the Temple of the Ancients by herself to try to defeat Sephiroth, I've just never been a fan of, because conceptually that's just kind of dumb. I'm also not sure if we're led to believe that she left directly after Temple of the Ancients and headed straight to Forgotten Capital, or if she went with our group to Gongaga, dropped off Cloud, and then by herself left and went to the Forgotten Capital. But either way, that doesn't even make sense. And I know I'm looking at it a little too literal, but these are completely different continents, right? Forgotten Capital is on the northern continent, Gongaga is on the western continent, southern end, and Temple of the Ancients is on the eastern continent, southern end. So she would have to travel literally across the planet by herself. And I just think, again, that's kind of ridiculous. Especially considering that we go to follow her after waking up in Gongaga and we have the tiny Bronco. So how exactly did she get there? As iconic as the moments are that take place in Forgotten Capital at the end of Disc 1, just kind of lead up to it's just weird, because I just don't think the character of Aerith should run off or would run off by herself without the party. They could drop Cloud off and the party could go with her. Or they could wait till Cloud wakes up and then everybody goes together. It's just a strange segment in my opinion. But the other reason why I feel like things could change is because with the original game, even though she does ultimately meet her fate at the Forgotten Capital, she does succeed in her plans of summoning Holy, right? We see that when we revisit the location with Bugenhagen, that she was successful. We see that, the Holy material is glowing green. And while Holy was successfully summoned, it is of course being held back by Sephiroth, and it's not till the end of the game where Aerith helps us with the livestream to defeat Meteor. And I think a lot of the events surrounding her fate could be altered for Remake, or play out differently, or her just potentially surviving, because what happens at the end of the game, she could probably do if she's alive, right? Like, with her connection to the planet, if the fate of the planet's on the line, I'm pretty sure she could be like, hey, yo, we need some help here, and the live stream would probably help. The planet would probably help to try to stop Meteor, right? But also, as we've talked about in the past, like, she could maybe survive the events of the Forgotten Capital. They could throw that swerve at us, like we expect her to die, and she doesn't, but maybe she dies at a later point. Another reason why I think that her fate could change is because if Sephiroth has the knowledge that we all believe he does, he should know that her dying ultimately leads to his fate. So he may not try to kill Aerith this time around. Maybe he chooses a different character. Maybe that's the swerve. We've seen him tease killing Barrett and Tifa when it came to the VR simulator. And I know a lot of the Tifa stands don't want to accept this potential, but we already seen him succeed in one of those, right? He stabs Barrett. Obviously, the Whispers are still around, and Barrett doesn't actually die, but he threatened to kill Barrett, and he followed through with that not that long after that shit, right? So it's very possible that in the future, he at least attempts to kill Tifa, if not succeeds in that. Another reason why I'd be fine with Aerith living is if it means that we get to have a meetup between her and Zack when they're both alive, because that's obviously something that we missed out on with the compilation, because they get separated for a handful of years, and obviously Zack dies before he ever reaches Midgard and gets to see Aerith again, and then she eventually dies in the FF7 story, and they meet up in the live stream, obviously. So you could probably guess what the next topic is going to be, but we did spend a lot of time talking about Aerith here, but I think it is important to discuss. It's a conversation that's been there for the last couple of years at this point. We then, of course, have my boy, Zack. It's my favorite Final Fantasy character. I've talked about this character a lot. A shit ton of videos on the channel are about the character of Zack and what may or may not be happening. But yeah, my favorite character. So, of course, I'm perfectly fine with him being alive. But also, I want that to be tied with the Aerith stuff, right? Tied in with the Aerith stuff. Where I want them both to... I want him to either see her before she dies, or she lives and they meet up eventually, whatever the hell happens, right? It's honestly kind of like the biggest fan service in some ways that you can do with the Remake trilogy, is letting these characters have that conclusion while they're alive, and then maybe they can die at a later point in the Remake story, somehow, some way, sacrifice themselves, maybe they need to die because that's what the destiny truly is, whatever the hell's going to be happening, right? But just them getting to, like, actually see each other, like, while alive is just a moment that I want more than maybe anything within the Remake trilogy. And Zack living is a change that I think most people are in agreement with, right? The community obviously has different ideas on whether he's alive or dead. But if we're just taking the ending of Remake at face value, he does appear to be alive. And I do want more for the character of Zack in the story, right? Because he's an integral part of the overall FF7 story, right? He's the main character of goddamn Crisis Core. But for the events of FF7, he's just motivation, so to speak, for the character of Cloud. And it kind of kicks off the FF7 story. And I'd love for him to have a bigger part in the ongoing events throughout Remake. Moving on from there, though, we get to what is actually the most important change that we're all clamoring for when it comes to the Remake trilogy, and that is Sapphire Weapon. I've actually done a whole entire video about this, of course, so we're not going to spend too much time on it, but I just personally have always wanted to fight Sapphire Weapon. That's what I've wanted since I was a kid. I love the scene as a whole, like, it's really cool watching him get his head blown off, but I always did, like, regret that we didn't get to fight him, and I hope that's something we could remedy with Remake. It could be a very similar situation to the original FF7 with Diamond Weapon, right? We fight Diamond Weapon, but then obviously the gigantic fucking cannon is what actually kills Diamond Weapon. They can do the same thing here. Like, our group could fight Sapphire Weapon, and then maybe the cannon then blows his head off. And kind of hopping back to something I mentioned earlier about the potential of, like, Tifa dying. It doesn't necessarily have to be Tifa, but given what Remake gave us, it seems like that's what, Sephiroth is threatening, at least at some point that he might try to kill Tifa. But I've done whole videos about this subject as well. I'm fine if they want to kill off other main characters, like, besides, Aerith, because that's the one we're expecting, because of the events of FF7. Like, we're only expecting Aerith to die, and that is it. And maybe they change some shit. I'm fine if they want to kill off, maybe another main character. Maybe he tries to kill Barret again and succeeds by the end or something. Or maybe by the end of the story, Cloud dies. Which I know he's the main character, main hero, but, like, with Sephiroth's attachment to Cloud, like, how do we truly ever fully defeat him, right? Because he's latched on to Cloud, and as long as he's a part of Cloud's memories or in Cloud's mind in any capacity, he cannot be truly defeated. And so I've done whole videos on that topic too, about the potential of Cloud dying when it comes to Remake trilogy. So I'm fine if they want to kill off other main characters, but it has to be handled correctly, right? I'm not saying that I just want a bloodbath, fucking massacre, or Sephiroth just bodying everybody, chopping everybody in half and shit. But, like, I'm fine if they want to kill off other main characters. It's just got to be done right. Now, what that is, I don't know. I'm not here to write the fucking script. That's Nojima. And this one's a pretty obvious one, but we do got to mention it. And it's just that, given, like, story and narrative to locations that didn't have it in OG FF7, there's just so many locations that you kind of just pass through. Even, like, Nibelheim, right? This iconic location. We come back to, there's a little bit of dialogue with our characters talking about it not being destroyed and shit. Like, obviously, we get that. But you literally just walk through it, right? You just go straight to Mountain of Bell. You can meet Sephiroth in the basement Shinra Manor and things like that, but there's not an actual story there, which is so weird given how iconic the location is. And stuff like Costa del Sol, too. That's another location. We get off the boat in Costa del Sol, and there's nothing. We can talk to Hojo on the beach, get a little bit of dialogue, a little bit of exposition. That's it. And so it's just kind of a blanket one. There's no specific locations necessarily, but just hopefully we get something. I'm not saying literally every single location needs to have an hour-long story or its own chapter, but most, I think, should. Like, one that I kind of forget about sometimes is Calm is a very similar situation to Nibelheim, where it was destroyed some time ago, and, like, Shinra rebuilt it. And that's something I kind of forget about, and I don't even remember where you learn, if you even learn that in game, or if that's from, like, an Ultimania or something, but, like, that's kind of an interesting thing, right? That's something it'd be nice to, like, get that in Remake, kind of like a tease, a little bit of foreshadowing for the events to take place in Nibelheim, because obviously we're going to get to Nibelheim and it's not going to be destroyed, despite what Cloud tells us with the Calm flashback. That's sort of it, at least that I kind of really think we need to discuss at length here. There's other ones like Jesse, Biggs, and Wedge Living that I'm fine with. I do think it undermines the events in Remake a bit if all three of them are alive, But I'm not going to lose sleep if they are, right? And if they get to go on and live happy lives instead of being dead like they were in the original FF7, I'm not going to complain about that. Like if Jesse gets to go, as we've been talking about for years, Jesse gets to go like work at Gold Saucer, Biggs maybe keeps working at the orphanage, and Wedge just lives with his cats and eats food and shit all the time, whatever the hell. Like if they just, that's a sweet ending for those characters, right? It's so much better than them just being dead. So I'm not going to like complain if they're all three alive. That's a change that I'm perfectly fine with as well. Another one that I might as well mention in this video since we're talking about it too, that's even polarizing in my own mind, is dying living. Which is hard to say just because the dying segment is so crucial to me. It's like my absolute favorite segment in FF7 Original. But if dying would get to live like after the fight with Barrett, and like Barrett can talk him down essentially, and he doesn't just kill himself, it'd be kind of cool for him to get to go see his daughter. And I'm not saying that he needs to move in and be like the dad, but like maybe from a distance, he goes and like sees Marlene, sees that she's alive, sees that she's okay, and then maybe just goes off on his own somewhere and we never see him again or something, right? Like that would be cool. I think that'd be a really bittersweet moment. I'm actually getting a little choked up thinking about it, which is weird because video games don't usually hit me emotionally, but just thinking about it right now, my eyes are starting to water a little bit. Holy shit. Now to be clear, Dyne is a bad guy, right? He does murder people, murder innocent people within the Gold Saucer. So his death is probably still going to happen because he obviously feels guilt. His hands are too bloody to hold Marlene like he says in the game or whatever. So that's probably still going to happen, but I'm just spitballing ideas. Like, I'd be fine if they went that route. Like, if they want to give my guy a happy ending as opposed to a tragic ending. I think we're going to start wrapping the video up here because we could keep talking about things that I wouldn't mind them doing with FF7 Remake, like trilogy. And it's kind of drifting a little bit away from what the kind of subject of the video was. We're kind of getting into, like, fan theory territory and shit now. But what are some changes you'd be fine with? When it comes to the Remake trilogy, whether that's in Rebirth or the third game, some stuff that, like Aerith living, Zack living, things like that, or whatever other original ideas that you guys might have. Like, what are some changes you'd be perfectly fine with when it comes to the Remake trilogy? That is the video, my dudes. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new. Social networks in the description below. Follow me on Twitter, @DaveYT. That's it. Bye.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Logain, or leave it like Cobain.